So we want this to be a panel with some presentation. I'd like to invite Michael, the rapporteur on the Change Control Board, and Miguel in person, who are attending in person, to join the panel. And then we have on Zoom, we have Henrik. JJ is unable to join, so Michael, if you can also substitute for JJ on the third party side, we'll continue with that. So first, let's start with the introductions. We thought change, yeah, in the answers, I think we'll cover what Change Control Board is, what the various special interest groups are doing, what are the different APIs in Mojaloop. We'll hear from the conveners for each of these, some of them volunteers and some of them doing great work as a bridge between the product implementation, DA and other governance groups. First, Michael, and then Miguel and Henrik. Henrik, can you hear us? Are you able to speak?
Yes, I can hear you. I hope you can see and hear me as well.
Thank you, Henrik. Henrik, why don't you go for it? Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, no worries. So hello, everyone. My name is Henrik Karlsson. I am deeply sorry that I wasn't able to join you in Zanzibar. I'm currently working for Ericsson as a system architect and a product owner for our mobile financial services product, Ericsson Wallet Platform. And in addition to that work, I also try to drive standardization within mobile financial services, where one part then is to lead this Mojaloop FSP interoperability SIG. But I'm also active in other forums, for example, the GSMA Mobile Money API. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions about the Mojaloop FSP interoperability API, and I hope to be able to meet you in a future convening.
Thank you, Henrik. Michael.
Thanks. I'm Michael Richards. I'm the rapporteur for the Change Control Board, which means I sort of run, in a vague sort of way, the overall API direction, and I'm responsible for the liaison between the various special interest groups. We'll be talking about how that works a bit later on.
Miguel, please.
Hello, I'm Miguel. As you know, I work for Infotech, and I'm a Mojaloop Principal Architect, as well as a member of the Design Authority Board, and also in charge of the admin special interest group Change Control Board for the APIs.
Thank you, Michael. JJ is unable to join us today, but he's, I think, a senior staff engineer at Google, and he's an expert in the APIs as well, and closely working with us on the third-party implementation. All right. So, Michael, as the rapporteur on the Change Control Board, can I ask you for a brief introduction on the CCB, the organization, how the CCB works, and then we'll go into panel with questions.
Yeah, would I be treading too hard on your toes, Sam, to talk a little bit, first of all, about why this is important and interesting? So the APIs are effectively the only way that anybody has to communicate with the Mojaloop system. There is no other way. There are standard ways in which participants of all kinds can interact with a Mojaloop scheme. So it's very important we get this right. They are together kind of like a language. They define the sorts of things you can tell the system to do and how you can tell them to do them. Now, there's a technical aspect to this and a formal aspect to it as well. But the real thing that counts, the really thing that's important about this whole thing is the content. It's the sorts of things that you're allowed to tell the system to do and the sorts of definitions that you're able to give of the kinds of things that you want to do. And these are things where we rely to a very great extent on people like you, people who want to use the system, people who want it to do various things, people who need it to do things that it doesn't do now. The system will need code to do those things, but it can't do them without APIs. There is no other way except through the API interface. So one of the reasons we're having this session today is to try to get people engaged, to get people the idea that if you want to know new things about things to do with Mojaloop, then the route to that starts with the APIs. So we're always interested to hear people's requests to be able to do various things, various new things. Sometimes we can say, ah, yes, you can already do that, and here's how. Other times we say, yeah, you're right. We really needed to do that sort of thing. So now we need to figure out perhaps a new endpoint, a new verb, a new way of saying do this or that. Perhaps it just needs additional information attached to something that exists already. So if you want the system to do something new, or if you want to know what the system does, then come and see some of us. So no, excuses for that. I will get on to talking about the organization. So we call this a change control board, but actually the change control board is just really a top level coordinating committee. Now we're responsible for instance, general statements about what APIs should look like, what endpoints should be like, about managing the release of APIs, about making sure that individual API proposals correspond with the way in which we would like to do things, that they're not duplicating things that are being done somewhere else, those kinds of things. And the people who sit on that are people who also lead what we call special interest groups, or SIGs. Now, one of the decisions we took a couple of years ago now was that we didn't want to have a single Mojaloop API. We started off just really with the FSP-IOP API, the main API for doing transfers and those sorts of things. We started to extend that subsequently and to recognize that we needed to do different kinds of things, but we thought that would be best served by having new special interest groups to look at those particular areas and to allow the change control board to look after the coordination between those areas. So we have at the moment three different APIs at the moment, API families. So the first is, as I've said, the FSP-IOP API, the main API. That also contains or is responsible for currency conversion, which is the API, specialist API that manages conversion for foreign exchange. And that special interest group is led by Henrik, whom you've just met. Second, we have the PISP API, the third-party payment initiator API. You've heard a little bit about that. But that's really a kind of specialized area of concern. It deals with different kinds of participants, and therefore it's got its own special interest group, which is headed by JJ GWAX, who, as you heard, unfortunately can't be with us today. So I will be trying and doubtless failing to be the JJ GWAX for the afternoon. Finally, is the admin API, and that covers all of the external things, the cross-cutting concerns that Pedro was just showing you, the things that manage settlements, that manage setting up participants, all of those kinds of things. And Miguel here is ably responsible for that. So that essentially is how things work. And the little box on the right-hand side says we can have more special interest groups. If there are more areas where we need to concentrate and have APIs and we think it merits a new special interest group, then we're very happy to set it up. We have a structure which is capable of extension and, dare I say it, replication.
Thank you, Michael. Do you want to cover anything on how the CCB it works?
No, I think I'm more or less covered. Sorry,
Okay.
no, I think I more or less covered that.
Thank you, Michael. So let's go to Henrik and ask Henrik, can you briefly explain to us what the FSP interoperability group does and anything you want to add as an introduction to that?
Yeah, I think Michael mentioned some part of it, but the SIG acts as a change control board for the Mojaloop FSP interoperability API. And then this API is the core API in Mojaloop. The main purpose of it is to enable a payer in one financial service provider, such as a mobile operator or a bank, to transfer funds to a payee in another financial service provider. And this API is not intended to be used by any front-end clients. It's a pure back-end API between systems. So any changes that you would like to do within this API, within the FSP IOP API, should be requested to this SIG.
Thank you, Henrik. Any change to the FSP interoperability API needs to go through the group here. Miguel, can you cover, in the introduction, I think we also should have said, Michael covered this, but We also have the settlement API and administration API as two separate APIs and under the single special interest group. So can you briefly explain what the SIG does and any intro?
Yeah, so those two APIs are kind of, let's say, umbrellaed under the admin aspect, right? So anything from basically managing a participant, onboarding, creating accounts, to, as we said, managing the settlement process and even producing reports around that is basically managed by the admin umbrella of family APIs, as it were.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Miguel. Michael, can you cover that for the third-party group as well?
Yes, sure. Third-party API is, I mean, it was actually the thing that convinced us that we really needed to have a family of APIs. As you know, we've extended the functionality of Mojaloop so that it supports people who aren't banks and other financial institutions. It supports third parties who are allowed to make requests to banks to move funds, but aren't themselves involved in the financial operation of the system. Now, that's a specialized kind of interface. Really, it has two parts. The first involves setting up links and contracts between the third-party payment initiators and the financial institutions that actually hold the accounts. And the second involves, first of all, requesting that a transfer be made, and second, allowing the financial institution to satisfy itself that that transfer really was requested by their customer and not simply by the third-party payment initiator or some bad actor or something like that. So we have an initial version of the API there. We are currently refactoring it to fit more closely with Google's operation. And we are also looking to extend it based on the feedback we're getting from people like our hackathon winners, for instance. So I'm looking forward to speaking to them about extensions to the API. So that's our PISP API.
Thank you, Michael. Also, some of the lessons learned from the hackathon where we saw that we might have some feedback for the PISP or third-party implementers as well. So continuing that, Henrik, can I ask, can you share with us any features that you have recently reviewed and approved?
I must say that the API has been relatively stable since it came out in 2018, which I hope is thanks to that we were pretty forward thinking while we designed the API. We did release a new version 1.1 in 2020, and that was to support the commit notification to the payee FSP to allow the switch to decide when a transfer has been committed. And we also had some other minor changes as well. Then in 2021, we added a new minor document change, which was to support distributed tracing. And that is the latest version that we have released. And then we have some more changes that are included in a 2.0 version, but that we haven't released yet. And those changes are related to knowing the type of the payer and the payee, and also adding some new additional possible types of a party. So that's upcoming in the future sometime. But before 2.0, there will be a version 1.2. And this version should add support for notifying a payee FSP in case a commit fails in the switch. And this is for those FSPs that are unable to use the commit notification that we added in version 1.1. But these changes haven't been approved yet, but will be soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Henrik. My apologies for the delay on getting that published.
No worries.
Sorry, so
Michael, go ahead.
Could I just suggest that it might be a good idea for perhaps you to just explain what our versioning technique is, just so people understand?
Yeah, definitely. So this is detailed in our FSP interoperability API definition. We follow the semantic versioning. As Henrik touched on, we have the version 1.1, but actually we are calling it 1.1.1 right now. So we follow the XYZ semantic versioning format where we have the major, minor, and a patch version. So any breaking change will have a major version change. For example, if we are at 1.1 now, if a new resource is introduced, or for example, a mandatory element is introduced, we want to make, it's a breaking change. it's a major change. So we have to go to 2.0. But if there is a minor change, meaning if there was an optional element with a new functionality introduced, then a minor version change is sufficient. Similarly, for a patch, for example, if there is a documentation change, but no change to the API itself or the functionality, then it can just be like a patch version change. So we are following that semantic versioning. And currently, I think there is one slide we covered on the core deck as well, where we have the versions listed for all the APIs we use. For the settlement, we use the 2.0.0. The admin, we're at 1.0.0. For third party, we are at 1.0.0, but we have a V2 that is approved. And then FSP obviously as saying a 1.1.1. Michael, is that what you want?
Yeah, sorry. One thing I would add though is when we use phrases like breaking changes, I'm going to look squarely at people who are already running implementations of Mojaloop, like FitserWorks, for instance, and say, please do come and talk to us about breaking changes, because obviously one of the things that we want to be able to do is to support wherever possible seamless transition in systems that are already running.
Good point, Michael. I see that JJ joined on the call. JJ, can you hear us and speak?
Yes, I can.
If you can,
sorry.
do you want to give a brief introduction? Go ahead. And also cover the third-party API, anything you
I
want.
dropped you in it already, JJ, so.
Thank you so much, Michael. Hi, I'm JJ. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I sit on the CCB with Henrik and Michael and all these lovely folks that we have here. I was primarily the one responsible for our original PISP API with Lewis Daly when he was a much more integral part of what we were doing here. Yes, there's quite a lot to discuss. Did you want me to touch on the versioning aspect or PISP APIs in general? I couldn't tell if you wanted to pick off where you.
PISP API in general, yeah, the third-party API in general, and then I have some questions. Go ahead.
Sure. So Michael talked a little bit about this earlier when he was saying, how PISPs work, and it's a concept of a third party, not a bank or not an FSP, actually participating in the system. And so there's a bunch of steps to these APIs, and they're a little bit unusual because you're dealing with someone who's not acting on their own behalf, they're acting on their user's behalf and trying to connect two main parties with the end user ultimately. And so I think that the biggest thing that we actually had to change and introduce here was the concept of a user. I think you all probably know Mojaloop is about FSPs talking to each other and moving things around. And authentication and approvals and all this is handled by the FSP themselves. So if a bank is on Mojaloop and they want to send money, it's their job to decide whether their user is approving this money to be moved. When you introduce the PISP API, the user actually becomes an integral part of what we're doing here, and the credential and everything is actually stored in Mojaloop as part of this idea of a consent. It's basically a resource that we introduced to hold a public key credential to be used for FIDO or another credential in the case of SMS OTP, things like that. So that's kind of the biggest leap I would say that we made with all of this, but it opens up the door for a whole lot of other really interesting functionality for Mojaloop. I think the biggest one that we're talking about right now is this idea of bulk payments. Michael and I are having a variety of discussions and debates on things like request to pay, and I think I talked a little bit about that yesterday. Yeah, the PISP API I think is the first of many in that it was aimed primarily at payment initiation. But we're going to start seeing more than just single individual user payment initiation, and I suspect more almost commercial payment initiation. So bulk is an example of this. Processing payroll and doing things of that nature are all things that could fall under this bucket. And so we're figuring out this broader category of third-party APIs as opposed to just payment initiation APIs.
Thank you, JJ. That actually helps us transition into the next question quite smoothly. I was going to ask each of the conveners, let's time box this, but can you give us an overview of the issue pipeline that you're having in the API, meaning what are the changes that are being requested currently and what might be approved? Henrik, can we start with you?
Yep, sure. I already mentioned the support for notifying the payee FSP in case of a commit fails. And other examples have briefly flown by in the presentation, for example, the currency conversion. That's a hot topic that we're discussing within our SIG. And then we also have a discussion on how to manage duplicate identifiers. If I use my MSIs in multiple FSPs, which one should be used in a transfer? So those are the main things that we discuss currently.
Thank you, Henrik. JJ, do you want to cover? I think you briefly touched on the bulk and other extensions. Anything else you want to add on that?
That was the main one that's up right now. Michael, actually, can you think of anything else? I don't have the issue list right in front of me. I kind of wish I did.
No, I think I mentioned already, JJ, the refactoring for version 2.
Sure, but functionality-wise, I think bulk is the main one we're looking at now. That doesn't mean that we're not planning to do and explore other things, but we're treading very carefully on some of this because it seems a lot like we're setting the stage for what the future of third-party APIs generally in Mojaloop will look like, and we really want to get it right so we don't have to go to version 3, 4, 5, etc. If we happen to make a mistake there. So right now, I think our focus is on bulk.
I agree.
Thank you, JJ and Michael. Miguel, can you give us the overview of the pipeline of issues you're considering on the admin side?
Yeah, we got one actually change request, which is actually turned into solution request, which was submitted by the ThyssenWorks team. And it's pretty much about introducing what we refer to as basically metadata properties. If you're familiar with the FSP IOP API, you might have seen extension lists. And in essence, what we want to do is introduce something similar to that into the actual, some of the admin APIs, specifically around the participants and accounts and things like that. But we want to do it a little bit differently. We want to introduce a little bit of a schema validation aspect to it. So in other words, we want to introduce a property definition for those properties where you define some kind of validation like a regex. And when you define those properties, you would basically reference that validation, that property key, that property name, to be able to do that. So that's being, that's currently being in solution proposal mode at the moment that we're looking at. And I would say the second thing as well is the settlement version 3 API, which is a bit more maybe in the future, but that's also on the pipeline.
Great, look forward to that. Thank you, Miguel. So my next question, I don't think all of the conveners need to answer this. One answer is enough, but others can add to that. So how do we make changes to the API? If ThyssenWorks or another implementer wants a product feature or wants to change the API because it's not currently supported, how do we go about that? Henrik, do you want to take that, considering like you are involved with the change request solution proposal template?
Yes. A very good start is always to discuss with someone from the actual SIG, and you're always welcome to contact me if you want to discuss any changes, because they might already be supported in the API to do what you're after. If it is not supported, then a change request will be created where we invite further discussion on GitHub. And after the change request has been discussed, maybe we'll come up with some different solutions. Then a solution proposal should be created and documented with the actual change, how that will be done within the API. And after that solution proposal has been accepted in the SIG and possibly also in the CCB, then a pull request will be created to make the actual changes to the document, and then reviewed and merged to the document.
Great. Discuss initially informally and then change request and solution proposal. Thank you, Henrik. Michael, JJ, Miguel, anything else you want to add to that?
Just to say that those processes are managed through GitHub issues, right? So you would go to basically the Mojaloop specification repo within the Mojaloop, and you would just click on the new issue and you would choose whether it's a change request or a solution proposal, and that would give you a template you'd be able to fill out.
Great addition, Miguel. We have the templates for this, so you have examples on how to create this. And the good thing is everyone in the community, anyone in the community can follow the discussion because the discussion is happening in a public forum. Thank you.
In the same place in the issue board there. You can view all the issues that are currently open or closed or,
Could I just add, I wanted to pick up on something that Henrik said, but I wanted to emphasize it. The people who lead the special interest groups are experts in the API. And if you come to them and ask a question about some new functionality, their first response will always be, let's see if we can do it with the existing API, because often that's possible. And of course, it's much easier to do it like that. I mean, for example, JJ will doubtless recall that a little while ago, we did the first mock-up of how we could do a third-party payment initiation just using the existing FSP IOP API. So we will say initially, let's see if we can do it with the existing API. If we can't, then we're very happy to extend it, because that means there's functionality that our users require, which we're not currently providing.
Great point, Michael. All right, I think one of our final questions. How are the changes published and how the changes rolled out? We covered how the changes are proposed, but Miguel, anything you want to touch on there? You added the open tracing standards to the FSP interoperability.
Yes, I mean, once the solution proposal is accepted, in essence, what's going to happen is the documentation around that API, which includes the markdown documentation itself in the repository itself, would need to be updated to include maybe any use cases or anything like that, as well as the actual interface specification itself. So that's the Open API spec itself, the YAML, etc., would need to be updated to reflect those changes. This would all be done through a pull request, obviously.
Yeah, it's also worth adding that in some cases, of course, new API functionality will require changes to the switch code. And one thing that we will therefore definitely want to do is to be able to coordinate those so that the API extensions are not released until the switch code is ready and able to cope with it.
100%. And those would generally end up as new features on the project storyboard within the Mojaloop org, right? And that would be then triaged and yeah.
But again, it's probably worth emphasizing that in a lot of cases, people think of Mojaloop as something where it's basically the switch that's doing everything. But an awful lot of the functionality of the Mojaloop system is actually about participants communicating with each other. And there are quite a number of cases where PISP, I think, is a good example of that. There's very little change to the actual switch code to support PISP. There are extensive and potentially complex changes to the interactions between participants, because we're introducing a different class of participant, and we're expecting, as JJ said, different interactions, because we have to think about end customers as well as participants. But actually, there was very little code to be written in the switch itself. It's almost all in the communication between the participants.
Thank you, Michael. It's challenging to have a session at 4:30, but I'm really happy to have Michael, Miguel, Henrik, and JJ on the call here. Everyone from CCB. Hopefully, also the governance councils will be able to meet in person periodically. Those are the questions I have, but I'll give like a few seconds for everyone to give some closing remarks, and then we'll close out. Can we start with Henrik? Any closing remarks?
Yeah, nothing more than that. You're always welcome to contact me if you have any questions related to the FSP interoperability API. I'm happy to support.
Thank you, Henrik. I appreciate that. JJ?
Yes, I'd like to echo that. Please contact Henrik.
Thank you.
He's very knowledgeable. He's kind of the person I am always glad is attending our CCB meetings. But same goes for Michael and I, jokes aside. If you have questions or interest in participating in any of our work regarding third parties, not just payment initiation, but third parties generally, please do reach out. There's plenty of interesting work going on, particularly if you're interested in bulk payments, because that's right now on the docket. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, JJ. Miguel?
If you go to the last slide. Yeah, there's also another route as well. We also have a channel on the Mojaloop Slack org, ML-CCB. Yeah, you can always jump on there and also ask questions and interact via that communication channel at the bottom here. If you're not part of the Slack channel, you can use that link.
Thank you, Miguel. Yeah,
sorry.
Michael, please. Michael,
yeah,
actually, I also wanted to.
The special interest groups, generally speaking, meet on a regular cadence. Those meetings are open to anybody who is interested in attending. You don't have to make any commitment. If you want to come along because there's a particular item that you're interested in, or because you just want to see what's going on, you would be most welcome. And if you contact the special interest group coordinators who are on this slide deck, then I'm sure they would be most happy to share the times of the meetings, the Zoom invitations, or in the case of Henrik, the Teams invitations, and the agendas with you. So please do. We want to reach out and get wider engagement from our community in the process of API development.
Thank you, Michael. If you have any questions about Mojaloop family of APIs, you can reach out to one of the conveners, Michael or myself. If you have questions about Swagger, what version do we support? How do we go about product feature changes? We'll be very happy to discuss with you. And also, we have regular meetings. I'll repeat the same thing. We'd be glad to have you join us. It's typically only us meeting all the time, or recently some of our team members from contributors from TitsaWorks joining because of the admin API related request, but it would be great to have you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the panelists. Simeon, over to you.
Thank you.